I realized I was in love with a man who never existed while he was stealing my dying mother's last dollar. The moment I found the bank statements, my hands started shaking. Not because of the numbers, though $127,000 missing would shake anyone. It was the date on the first transfer, the same night Judas first told me he loved me. While I was falling asleep in his arms, he was draining my mother's account from his phone. But the real betrayal, the person who'd seen those statements weeks earlier and said nothing, was sitting 3 desks away from me, sleeping with my boss, waiting for me to fall so she could take my job. This is the story of how I lost everything in 3 months and spent 8 years getting it back. Stay with me, because what happened next changed laws in 15 states. Ruth Moreno, 34, Marketing Director. Ruth's career was finally taking off after years of grinding through late nights and weekend projects. She'd just been shortlisted for VP of Marketing when her mother started showing signs of dementia. Enter Judas, charming, attentive Judas, who volunteered at the senior center where her mother spent afternoons. "I can help," he offered over coffee one day. "I have experience with elder care. Your mom loves me." Ruth was drowning. Between board presentations and her mother's declining health, she barely slept. Judas seemed like a godsend. He moved into her mother's spare room, managed medications, handled appointments. Ruth could breathe again. She even started to fall for him. His gentle way with her mother, how he'd text Ruth sweet updates throughout the day. Then came the romance. Dinners after her mom was asleep, his hand finding hers. "I've been waiting for the right moment. I didn't want to complicate things, but Ruth, I'm falling for you." For 3 months, Ruth lived in a bubble of relief and new love. Her career soared. She got the VP position. Her mother seemed stable. Judas was there for everything. Until her colleague Miriam pulled her aside. "Ruth, I don't want to alarm you, but my aunt's caregiver. It sounds just like your situation. The guy scammed her for $80,000. The investigation revealed everything. Judas had been draining her mother's accounts, small amounts at first, then larger transfers. He'd forged her mother's signature on credit card applications. The romance, a calculated move to keep Ruth distracted and trusting. But the deepest cut came from her assistant, Delilah, whom she'd mentored for 2 years. Delilah had known about Judas for weeks. She'd seen the suspicious bank statements Ruth's mother's lawyer had sent to the office. Delilah had said nothing because she was sleeping with Ruth's boss, angling for Ruth's position when the scandal broke. Ruth lost $127,000, her mother's trust, her relationship, and nearly her career. The betrayal wasn't just romantic or financial. It was a web of deception that exploited her love, her professional ambition, and her family's vulnerability all at once. The police investigation moved slowly. Judas had used multiple aliases. This wasn't his first con. Detective Miriam Washington told Ruth he'd done this to at least 7 other families across 3 states. He targets high-achieving women with aging parents. The pattern is always the same. Gain access through the parent, romance the daughter, clean out accounts, disappear. Ruth's mother, Naomi, withdrew completely. The dementia made it worse. Some days she remembered Judas and asked when he was coming back. Other days, she accused Ruth of stealing from her. "You brought that man into my home," she said during a lucid moment, and the words cut deeper than any of Judas's lies. The company put Ruth on administrative leave while they investigated Delilah's involvement. Delilah had been feeding information to Ruth's boss, Caleb, for months, not just about Judas, but about Ruth's strategies, client relationships, and vulnerabilities. The affair between Delilah and Caleb had started 6 months before Judas appeared. Caleb's calculation was ruthless. If Judas destroyed Ruth's credibility, he could push her out and promote Delilah, whom he controlled. If Ruth survived, Delilah would remain his mole in her department. Either way, he won. But Caleb underestimated Ruth's documentation. Over 2 years, she'd kept meticulous records of her work, her client wins, her strategic decisions. When Delilah tried to take credit for a major campaign Ruth had developed, Ruth had received every email, every draft, every meeting note. Ruth hired attorney Hannah Wang, who specialized in elder financial abuse. "We're going after everyone," Hannah said. "Judas, obviously, but also the bank that allowed those transfers without proper verification. And Delilah. She had a fiduciary duty to report suspected financial crimes. She saw those bank statements and said nothing." The civil suits would take years, but Hannah was confident. Judas might have disappeared, but he left a trail. And Delilah, she's right here. The harder battle was criminal. The DA's office was overwhelmed, and elder fraud cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute. But then came the break. Judas surfaced in Arizona with a new identity, running the same scam on another family. This time, the daughter was an FBI agent. Federal charges changed everything. Judas was arrested, and suddenly prosecutors in multiple states were interested. Ruth's case became a part of a larger RICO investigation. At work, Ruth requested a formal investigation into Caleb and Delilah. She discovered something explosive. Caleb had been skimming budgets from her department to inflate his own numbers. Delilah's job was to keep Ruth too distracted to notice. The board was horrified, not just by the theft, but by the liability. If Ruth went public, the company would face massive reputational damage. They offered her a settlement, full reinstatement, Delilah's termination, Caleb's demotion, and $500,000. Ruth's advice was to take it. Ruth wanted blood. "Counteroffer," she told the board chairman. "Full reinstatement, Delilah fired, Caleb fired, not demoted, $1 million, and I want his job as SVP of marketing." They initially refused. Ruth leaked selected documents to a business journalist she'd cultivated over the years. The story, Fortune 500 company harbored a boss who exploited a family's crisis, was devastating. The board caved. Ruth got everything she demanded. But victory tasted like ash. Ruth's mother had to move to memory care. The betrayal had accelerated her decline. The guilt consumed her. Every time she visited, her mother either didn't recognize her or blamed her for Judas. "You brought that man into my home," she said during a lucid moment, and the words cut deeper than any of Judas's lies. The therapy was brutal. Ruth had to confront how she'd prioritized career over noticing the warning signs. Judas had isolated her mother slowly. She'd been too busy to see it. Delilah had been cold and calculating for months. She'd been too trusting to notice. "You're blaming yourself for other people's malicious choices," Dr. Martinez said. "That's not the same as taking responsibility for what you can control going forward." Miriam, the colleague who'd first warned her about Judas, became an unexpected friend. Miriam had her own story. Her aunt had lost everything to a similar scam and died in a state nursing home. "I saw the signs," Miriam said over coffee. "I couldn't let it happen to someone else." Together, they started a support group at work for employees dealing with elder care issues. Ruth used her new position to implement company policies, paid family leave for elder care emergencies, financial counseling services, and mandatory reporting protocols for suspected abuse. It wasn't just altruism. Ruth was building a network of loyalty. People remembered who helped them during the worst times of their lives. 18 months after his arrest, Judas went to trial. Ruth had to testify, reliving every manipulation. His defense attorney tried to paint Ruth as a willing participant who later regretted a consensual relationship. "Did Mr. Rivera ever tell you he loved you?" the attorney asked. "Yes," Ruth said steadily. "And did you believe him?" "I did." Ruth looked directly at Judas. "I believed a lot of things he said. That's what good con artists do. They exploit trust. But let me be clear. I loved someone who didn't exist. The man I thought I knew would never steal from a confused elderly woman." The jury saw through the defense. Judas was convicted on 14 counts of elder fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud across multiple states. Judge Joanna Okonkwo said at sentencing, "Your crimes were particularly heinous because you weaponized love and family bonds to victimize the most vulnerable." Ruth felt nothing watching him being led away in handcuffs. She had expected catharsis. Instead, she just felt tired. Delilah's downfall. Delilah's consequences came faster and harder. Fired from the company, she couldn't find work in the industry. Ruth's network was vast, and word spread quickly. Delilah had betrayed the unwritten code. You don't betray a mentor, and you don't use someone's family crisis as a weapon. Delilah tried to salvage her career by going public, painting herself as the victim of a toxic workplace. She gave an interview to a podcast about women in business.
I was sleeping with my boss because I felt I had no choice. The power dynamics were. Ruth's lawyer immediately sent a cease and desist, along with documentation that Delilah had initiated the relationship with Caleb and had bragged about it in texts to friends. The podcast issued a retraction. Delilah's final attempt was suing for wrongful termination. It was laughed out of court. The judge noted that Delilah had admitted to deliberately withholding information about suspected financial crimes against a colleague's family member. You were fired for cause, and frankly, you're fortunate no criminal charges were filed. Last Ruth heard, Delilah was working in a call center in another state using her maiden name. Caleb fared slightly better, but not by much. Demoted to a junior director role in a different division, he became a cautionary tale. His reputation as someone who'd sacrificed his employees for personal gain preceded him. No one trusted him, no one worked with him willingly, and his career had a ceiling he'd never break through. He tried to leave the company, but the severance terms of his demotion included a non-compete clause. He was trapped in a job he'd once looked down on, watching Ruth rise while he stagnated. The hardest work was with Naomi. For 2 years, their relationship was fractured. Ruth visited every week, even when her mother didn't know her, even when Naomi said cruel things. Then came a breakthrough during a music therapy session at the memory care facility. The therapist played songs from Naomi's youth, and suddenly she was there, fully present. She looked at Ruth and said, "You look tired, honey." "I am, Mom," Ruth admitted, tears streaming. "I'm so tired." "I know you tried to protect me," Naomi said softly. "I remember more than they think I do. That man, he was very convincing. I wanted someone to care about me, too. We both fell for his lies." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was understanding. They held hands while Billie Holiday played, and for the first time in 2 years, Ruth felt like she had her mother back, even if only for moments. 3 years after Judas's conviction, Ruth met Silas at a conference. He was a CFO, divorced, with aging parents of his own. Their first conversation was about the challenges of long-distance elder care. "My dad has Parkinson's," Silas said. "I'm trying to figure out how to manage his care from 3 states away." Ruth shared her story, not all of it, but enough. Silas listened without judgment. "That's terrifying. How do you trust anyone after that?" "Slowly," Ruth said. "Very, very slowly." They dated for a year before Ruth even introduced him to her mother. She ran background checks, discreetly. She watched how he treated service workers, how he talked about his ex-wife, how he handled stress. Silas understood. He'd been burned too, though not as severely. "I get it," Silas said when Ruth explained her caution. "Trust is earned, especially when it's been weaponized against you." He met every test without knowing he was being tested. When he finally met Naomi, he brought photo albums of his own parents and sat with her for 2 hours, listening to her stories, even the ones she repeated 3 times. The FBI's investigation into Judas's network eventually recovered $89,000 of Ruth's mother's money from hidden accounts. Combined with the settlement from the bank, which had failed to catch obvious red flags, Naomi's losses were reduced to about $15,000. But 7 other families weren't as lucky. Judas had spent their money or hidden it so well it might never be found. Ruth used part of her company's settlement to establish the Naomi Foundation.
providing financial assistance to elder fraud victims and funding education programs about financial abuse. Miriam became the foundation's director. Ruth was chairman. Together, they'd helped over 200 families in 3 years. 5 years after the betrayal, Ruth was named CEO of a mid-sized competitor. The board headhunted her specifically because of her reputation, brilliant, resilient, and ethical to her core. Her first major decision? Implementing the most comprehensive elder care support program in the industry. Employees could take up to 6 months paid leave to handle family emergencies. The company partnered with vetted elder care agencies and financial planners. This isn't just good policy, Ruth told the board. It's good business. Our people perform better when they're not drowning in family crises, and they're loyal to companies that treat them like humans. The program became an industry standard, copied by competitors. Ruth didn't mind. The point isn't competitive advantage, she said in an interview. The point is that what happened to me never happens to someone else if we can prevent it. Through the foundation, Ruth connected with Judas's other victims. They formed a support group, sharing their stories, their healing processes, their setbacks. One woman, Joanna, had lost her mother's entire estate, over $400,000. She died thinking I'd stolen from her. The dementia made her forget it was him. She died hating me. The group understood what others couldn't, the specific pain of having love weaponized, of family bonds used as access points for predators, of being betrayed on multiple fronts simultaneously. They lobbied together for stronger elder protection laws. 3 states passed legislation requiring stricter background checks for professional caregivers and mandatory reporting for suspected financial abuse. The laws were nicknamed Naomi's Laws, in Ruth's mother's honor. Naomi passed away 6 years after Judas's conviction, on a sunny morning with Ruth holding her hand. Her last words were, "You did good, honey. You always did good." Ruth wasn't sure if her mother meant in that moment or in life, but she chose to believe both. At the funeral, Silas squeezed her hand. Miriam spoke about Naomi's grace. The memory care staff came. So did 3 other families from the support group. But the most surprising attendee was Caleb. He stood in the back, didn't approach, just nodded at Ruth across the room. Later, she found a card. "I'm sorry for my part in your worst year. Your mother raised someone better than I deserved to work with." It wasn't redemption, but it was something. Now, 8 years later, Ruth runs the foundation full-time, having stepped down from the CEO role to focus on advocacy. She married Silas, who'd proven himself trustworthy through countless acts of integrity. She still sees Dr. Martinez monthly. "Do you trust easily now?" the therapist asked during a recent session. "No," Ruth said, "but I don't think that's a flaw anymore. I trust intentionally. I verify, I watch for patterns, and I trust myself to recognize when something's wrong." "That's growth," the therapist smiled. Ruth has trained herself to spot the warning signs she missed with Judas: love bombing, isolation tactics, rushing intimacy, exploiting vulnerabilities. She teaches these in workshops for professional women. The goal isn't paranoia, she tells audiences. It's informed caution. Trust your gut, verify the facts, and remember, someone who truly loves you will respect your boundaries, not rush you past them. The ultimate triumph came last year when Ruth testified before Congress on elder financial abuse. She told Naomi's story, Delilah's betrayal, and how the systems had failed them all. "My mother's dementia made her vulnerable, but the systems that should have protected her, banks, care facilities, workplace protections, all failed. We need federal standards, mandatory reporting, and real consequences for financial predators." The legislation passed with bipartisan support, the Elder Financial Protection Act. It mandated stricter banking protocols, required background checks for care workers with access to finances, and established a federal task force for elder fraud. The president signed it with Naomi's photo displayed. This law is named the Naomi Moreno Elder Protection Act, in honor of a woman who deserved better and a daughter who made sure others would get it. Ruth stood in the Oval Office, thinking about the woman who'd raised her, the trust that had been violated, the career almost destroyed, and the long road back. Judas had taken so much, but in the end, Ruth had transformed that theft into protection for millions. That night, she visited Naomi's grave and told her about the law. We won, Mom. Everyone who tried to break us, they lost. And you became a legacy.